All right, welcome to the Armchair Commanders podcast. My name is John,
And I'm Jack.
and we're glad to have you all with us. This week we are reviewing the 1993 war epic of Gettysburg, which covers the famous Battle of the Civil War. And as we mentioned last week, today we're joined by a special guest. His name is John, and he is from all sorts of varied projects, but his brand is the Tattooed Historian. John, if you'd like to say hello and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, hello everybody. John, Jack, thank you for having me on. I am originally from Pennsylvania, now living in Maryland for the current time. I am an old school historian, I guess you could say, and I earned my master's degree in 2013 and went on to work alongside the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And I was a historian and archivist for a couple years and decided that wasn't for me. The cubicle life wasn't for me, so I started my project, which is called the Tattooed Historian, and it's really taken off from there and allowed me to do a lot more than I thought I would be able to do, and definitely more than I would be able to do in the cubicle. So I'm across about 9 platforms now, trying to create content and keep up with everything going on. So it's going to be a wild ride into the future to see where this goes. But really happy to be on this and to be talking with you about one of my favorite movies of all time, gentlemen. So yes.
Now, is that's a serious statement or a
uh,
rhetorical one?
top 2 Civil War movies of all time.
Okay.
So
Well, this might turn into an interesting conversation because
yeah.
me and Jack we chatted a little bit about it because we watch. I watched it once by myself, and then Jack, do you have something you would like to admit to?
Uh, I'd like to just take a minute to revel in the fact that I have the first public apology of this show. We all knew it was coming, though. So I would like to apologize to our dear listeners. I made a bold claim last week that I would watch this all in one sitting. And I didn't do that. It actually was like 3 sittings. So yeah, just had to eat a bit of crow, and it takes a big man to admit his faults.
Well, to be fair, this is a long movie. I remember sending John an email like last week. I was like, "Hey, I saw the director's cut is like 5+ hours. I don't have the mental capability of handling that. Let's just do the theatrical cut." And then the theatrical cut turns out to be 4.5 hours, and I'm like, I guess it didn't matter which one we chose either way.
Nope.
No, it is an epic, and it kind of harkens back to those like 1970s films. It's like the 4 to 5 hour epics you would have of like Ben Hur or
Lawrence of
Lawrence
Arabia,
of
or
Arabia. Yeah, and that's not why I like it, but we'll get into that. But it kind of harkens back to that.
I was like, this movie had to have had an intermission when it was in theaters.
It did. It did. I went and saw it twice in the theater. I sat through it twice in the theater, and you did have an intermission, so you did get a bathroom break.
Okay, well, at least you didn't have to worry about missing out on anything.
That's right.
So, as we usually like to start off, Jack, what'd you think?
This was a movie. Um, it was really long. It was about the Battle of Gettysburg, and
Very astute observations you got going here.
I didn't know there was so much chatting going along the Battle of Gettysburg. Right.
Yeah, when we were talking about Alamo a couple of weeks ago, my biggest complaint was about how we didn't really get a deeper look into the characters of the main people who were involved in that battle. And this movie kind of goes to the opposite end of the spectrum, where it seems like every single person gets a monologue in this movie. And at times it gets to be much, or a little frustrating. I don't know how you feel about that, John, but there were definitely times in this movie where I was just thinking to myself, I'm like, this is the largest land battle in North American history, and there seems to be more philosophical chatting than there is fighting going on.
Yeah, we have to remember too that this is based on a novel, and it's based on The Killer Angels by Michael Shara, and that's the way the chapters were set up. The chapters are set up as characters, not like Chapter Two, the Battle of Culp's Hill, or whatever else it was. Chamberlain and Buford and Longstreet and all that. So you're almost bound to have these kind of scenes where the scenes are kind of like the chapters, where okay, this is the Longstreet scene for this particular for day 2 or whatever the case may be, and he gets his time to shine or whatever you want to say with that. I actually read that book when I was 8, and it was the first kind of historical novel I ever read in my life, and it's what when I finally learned that I was into this sort of thing. So to see the movie kind of taking that same line, but again, you can't get everything in the book into the movie. They tried. 4 hours is a long time. They tried to get it all in there, but I think that's why it appealed to me so much in that time period, because we have to remember it's 1993. We don't even have email yet, you know.
Right.
So we have all these devices that kind of help us to like get through long movies. Back then we didn't think about that kind of stuff. um and
I
i
won't
think i
lie.
think you're
I
right though, that's how it is, with those long kind of scenes, and someone gets to get their speech out there for a little bit and stuff.
I was going to say, I'm not going to lie. I did quite a bit of scrolling on the phone during this film, at least the second watch through.
Yeah, we didn't have that option in 1993. We were kind of stuck in the theater with a bunch of other nerds uh, watching this film. But I think it was just it was made for the time, like Ben Hur was made for the time and stuff.
It definitely it is. It's very reminiscent of. It seems like Ron Maxwell was trying to meet somewhere in between the middle of Glory and a Ken Burns documentary.
Mm-hmm.
And we can see that in the opening and the closing of this movie. It's a very heavily influenced by the Ken Burns style, if you will. But um, I don't know. It just when watching this movie, it felt to me as like he's trying to make a longer, more in depth Glory, but it's not as captivating. At least for me, it wasn't in that sense. Because I think Glory came out in '89, I think.
89, I believe. Yeah.
So, I mean, and the Ken Burns Civil War series came out in '90 or '91. So, this was, very recent memory. And you could see the success of both of those programs where you could see, where Ron Maxwell would be like, well, both of these were super good and successful. Why don't I make a 4.5 hour Gettysburg epic and I will make all the dollars from it, you know?
Mm-hmm. And you have the backing of Ted Turner, who has TNT television, where it runs later on. So you're checking all those boxes, where it's like, okay, maybe we can make a go at this and put out this epic. You're absolutely right. It's kind of like the book ending of Civil War popular history at that time, because you do have Glory, and then you do have the Ken Burns series, and everyone is just hyped on this stuff, and it's one of the peaks of the Civil War hobby as far as studying it or reenacting it. And now comes this large scale epic, and it just seriously drives things forward. I mean, the movie is why I became a reenactor, because I wanted to march in those lines and fire those cannons and stuff like that. And that was just one of those things that impacted me from that. But again, that was 12, 13-year-old kid seeing this, and it's like, wait, I can do this. I can
Right.
fire cannons and do all this crazy stuff. So yeah, that's awesome. But yeah, you're absolutely right. With that time and knowing that is everything is hot right now for Civil War stuff at that time, um, why not try it, and see what happens.
So I know you mentioned that it was a big part of you getting into the reenacting hobby. I That was something I wanted to touch on was the number of reenactors that this film had was really impressive, and I think it was something that was both a benefit to the film, but was also a detriment.
Mhm.
Because for me, obviously these reenactors, a lot of these guys are people who are super vested in the topic. They love the history. It is what they do in their free time. And so, you know, the producers of this film, they have a built-in core of people who can come and fill in, these large, you know, bodies of troops to, because this was at a time when CGI was not really permissive of replacing people yet
Mhm.
in battlefield scenes. So it is very, it was very impressive seeing like the day they did the Pickett's charge scene and having was it like 20 plus cannons all in one shot going off. Like that's very impressive, and I'm sure, obviously it influenced you, but I'd have to imagine that the reenacting community probably saw a big uptick after this movie came up.
Oh yeah, yeah. There was a huge bump after it, and it was definitely in the eastern part of the United States. There was a huge bump because people could then go to Gettysburg and reenact and do the Pickett's Charge thing and be like they just witnessed in the movie and hang out with guys who were actually in the movie. Because they picked all the reenactors they could to get into this film. Like you said, they had these mass amount of people, and in fact, there's still stories going around Gettysburg where uh, they would have less men on the field than they needed, and they would go to like Walmart and get locals and be like, "Hey, do you want to help out with this?" And you could
Just
tell in some points there's a scene in the Little Round Top scenario where the Confederates of the 15th Alabama are rolling up towards the 20th Maine, and you see this guy. It's in one of the advances, and you see this guy, and he has his musket down at his waist instead of up at his shoulder, and he fires it from down at his waist, like waist firing it, and he's looking at it like it's a foreign object. And I'm like, I know that guy was one of those guys who was plucked out of a store somewhere. And it's like, hey, you want to come out here and do this? And he's like, how do you use this thing? And making sure it works right or stuff. Because he's looking at it like he's never used this before. And I'm like, that's one of those people they probably plucked out of the local population. Like, hey, we need someone that looks like a Civil War soldier. Just get out here. But you could do that back then.
Right.
Reenacting in the '90s was even less safe than and I got the stories for that too, but
Back in the day, we used real bayonets.
oh yeah, I remember when we were allowed on the small events to use real bayonets, and yeah, I've been cut by one, so yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Talk about
Yeah,
sacrificing for your art.
yeah, we well, I was reenacting with a bunch of guys who served in Vietnam. They didn't fear much, and it's that and these are the same guys who were in this movie. So much so that it was passed down to us when we came into these organizations and stuff. They would talk about being in the movie. And when they said the movie, they meant Gettysburg because there was no other Civil War movie at that time. They meant Gettysburg. And they're like, well, we were at the movie and Ted Turner was there and his wife, Jane Fonda, showed up and we all just like turned our backs on them because of what Jane Fonda had done during the Vietnam War. And so it's that still resonated with them and that was still part of their lives. So these are the guys that you're watching in this movie. These guys are Korean War veterans, Vietnam veterans, and regular old just civilians who got involved in reenacting, and they're being pushed out there into these massive shots like you saw with 20 cannons lined up and everything else. I mean, this propelled popular culture and popular history in the Civil War field for years to come. I remember going to events in the late '90s, and we're still talking about this. And there's, I remember being on a gun line of artillery. There's 45 cannons on the gun line, and it's like the real thing almost, where you're like, wow, this is getting really cool, you know. And each one of those guns was in the movie. So, and in Gettysburg. So this thing really impacted a lot of people, and that's why I said it's in my top 2 Civil War movies of all time, because I felt that impact.
That is that is really impressive. I think, going back a little earlier when I said it was also to the detriment a little bit,
Mhm.
is that obviously you have a lot of people who are very passionate about this subject, but that also brings up the fact that, you know, they're not professional actors per se.
Mhm.
I know there's quite a few different scenes that me and Jack kind of just burst out laughing because there would be a scene where there's not even an explosion or the person falling. It's just like a quick 2-second cut of a person flying through the air, and it's
Mhm.
it's like a very Monty Python, like ah, or like one scene where a group of a company gets hit by a shell, and you see a person fall down with the flag, but like they keep their arms straight up in the air with the flag up so somebody
Right.
else can grab it from them.
Right.
Um, and if you're not looking for that stuff, you'd probably miss it. But if you look closely, there's a lot of things in this movie where you're like, it's like you said, you're the guy they picked up at Walmart. Like,
Yeah. 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 And there were, like, that's funny you mentioned the flag bearer thing. And I know exactly what you're talking about, because I've probably watched this movie 500 times. Okay. And so I used to know 4 hours of lingo from this movie. I could go front to back and do the entire script. And that's how nerdy we were back then, because we had nothing else to do. We might as well watch this movie again. But I remember, like, reenactors saying, "Don't never let the flag touch the ground. No, it doesn't matter which one it is. Don't let it touch the ground." And so that's that mentality of reenactorisms. The flag should be touching the ground because the guy just got shot dead, but you're taught to, like, hand it off to the next person or whatever else. So you are seeing the reenactorisms come out, as I call them, in the movie, and you are seeing a lot of the lost cause mentality coming out too, with this. But that's how it was taught to us in the early '90s, still,
right,
even in school. And so you see that kind of old way of thinking of the war itself, the battle. And so it's a great microcosm of that historical memory of the early '90s, clear back to the Centennial days.
right. So you brought up the next thing I wanted to chat about, and I know both me and Jack, we were like, us being from the next generation up from you,
Mhm.
we we both grew up in a time frame where in high school and college we're getting taught the new revised version of the Civil War, which is,
Mhm.
big on debunking the
Mhm.
lost cause and very, this is slavery centric theory.
Mhm.
Could you kind of go in for our listeners who don't know as much? Could you kind of give us a brief overview of lost cause and kind of where that came from?
Oh, sure. I'm so glad that we are disengaging with the lost cause behavior. I was firmly entrenched in it for years because that's what I was taught, and you didn't really question it for a long time. But lost cause theory, or the idea of the lost cause, started right after the war itself ended, and this is the time frame where everyone's trying to reconcile with what they had just gone through, the massive trauma that America had just gone through. And it was the idea of, uh, there always has to be a winner and a loser, but we start to see this idea that the people who lost the war are trying to reframe why they even fought in the first place, to kind of make it a little bit easier pill to swallow, let's say. It's a lot of trying to glaze over causation and saying no, it was never about slavery, it was about states' rights. And then you ask, well, states' rights to do what? You know, and then we can move from there. But the fundamentals of the lost cause mentality are brought about after the war, after the fact. Hindsight's wonderful. You can go back and you can say, well, I didn't really believe that, but this is what we believed. But their secession documents say otherwise, and their writings say otherwise, and so there is a whole reckoning with the lost cause, and we see it gravitate towards many different Americans, North and South, many different white Americans who are coming together for reconciliation, because we're starting to go into the Jim Crow era of American history later on in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And it becomes this kind of bedrock of white reconciliation and saying, well, we gallantly fought one another, or my father fought gallantly or whatever, but didn't believe this or that or whatever else. It was only about, you know, states' rights versus a strong central government. And they say that in the beginning of the movie Gettysburg. It's in there. It's right in the beginning of it. They say, that one side believes in a strong central government and the other side believes in states' rights. They don't mention slavery in the beginning of this movie.
Right. And I think one of the most telling scenes in this entire movie, and is often one of the most quoted scenes in this movie that, projects that mentality is I'm fine for my rats.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. That one, and there's one more, John, that's like just makes me shake my head every time, and it's the quintessential lost cause stuff. It's when Longstreet's talking to Fremantle, and he says we should have freed the slaves and then fired on Fort Sumter. And it's like, well, then what are you fighting for?
Yeah.
Because the secession documents say this is what you're fighting for. I mean, the he's from South Carolina / Georgia. It depends on what era we're talking about. Uh, but even Longstreet's, home states. You look at the secession documents from South Carolina and Georgia, and you know exactly what they're fighting for.
Oh
They
yeah.
say it, and you Texas is the worst
Yeah,
secession
it's like
document
it's like
in my
line 2.
right, right. And I mean, the first. It's no coincidence that the first two states to secede have the heaviest population of enslaved people. That's no coincidence. You have South Carolina and Mississippi, the two bedrocks of the Confederacy. And to hear that in a movie is just so hilarious to us. But it also goes back to that old reconciliation stuff, where it's, what does it say, like same land, same God, different dreams. It's what are you even talking about? We can't get the dreams right, So, but we didn't touch that back then. And it was to our detriment that we didn't really engage with this kind of what your generation is engaging with. And why we keep butting heads as a society is because we didn't engage the proper narrative and the proper documents. For years we glazed it over and said, oh, it we've reconciled, we've moved on, when we never did. We haven't moved on. We're still fighting Reconstruction 3.0 in some cases.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean we saw that with the reemergence of the Confederate statue debate a few years ago. And
Mm-hmm.
it's obviously still something that's going on today, but that was you know I think that was that started really picking up speed right at the end of our college career. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
for me and
Mm-hmm.
Jack, we went to the same school, so
Mm-hmm.
the
Yeah.
great
Hasn't been able to get rid of me since.
no,
Well, the interesting part of this whole equation, guys, is that when the movie came out, I decided I wanted to reenact, and for 15 years I reenacted Confederate. So I heard all this stuff.
isn't that the doesn't that tend to be the most popular side of Civil War reenacting? Isn't there like three Confederate reenactors for every Union reenactor?
Back then, yeah. Yeah, back then we always outnumbered the U.S. Army guys. Um, that was the way it was, and it was that idea that transpired from Gettysburg, and then you always had people who were either they loved Gettysburg or they loved Gone with the Wind,
Ooh.
and there's your two big ones right there, and there you see
Good old Antebellum South.
right there you see where we're heading with this thing. Uh, I reenacted with guys who hated glory.
Really?
Yeah, because they didn't want that story to be told. These are the people I reenacted with. That's why I understand some of the dog whistles and stuff. I know what they're saying. So when you see,
I mean, how can you hate Denzel's performance? He was magnificent in that film.
he was magnificent. Yeah, that's my top Civil War movie of all time. But the ideas that we got from Gettysburg still resonate in that town, with the idea of reconciliation, with the idea of this glorious kind of combat, and people want to see each other on both sides. And, basically Harmstead wants to shake hands across the wall with Hancock, just like the veterans do. That's all set up back in in the early 1900s. That's not even done for real. That's a thing for the photographs. But that's the kind of feeling we get from this movie in that regard. So I'm seeing it as a period piece and kind of harkening back to when I was a kid and saying this is why this movie really resonates with me, because it impacted my next step in my life. You guys could look at this movie and say this thing is just too long and these guys just bloviate too much. And I understand that because we're used to hard hitting, like the new All Quiet on the Western Front or something like that, where it's like it's in your face, you get to meet the characters for a little time, there's no big speeches, and we're done. We want the topic, we want that all together.
Right.
So I understand. I understand there's a generational thing here too. That we have to look at. That component is big.
I know, Jack, when we were talking about this the other day, you mentioned that you personally would have probably enjoyed this more had it been presented in a different way, not even topic wise, but like in the formatting of it, whether it was a shorter film or broken up. Like for you, what do you think would have made this film more palatable?
Mini series on HBO.
Directed by Tom Hanks.
Yes.
I like this idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Jared Leto as General Longstreet. Joking, I hate Jared Leto.
No, I like the idea, Jack, of a miniseries. That's interesting.
Tom Holland as General Robert E. Lee.
Tom Holland as General Lee.
Please, someone stop me before I continue.
I think he's a year or two young for that.
Yeah.
And then another thing, like this, it's important to note Martin Sheen's height is 5'7", but Robert E. Lee was 6'1" to 6'2". I know he can't help that, so I don't hold it against him. And he actually did a really good job as Robert E. Lee. Not that I'm saying I know the guy Robert E. Lee. Never even heard his voice, but
I don't think anybody has. Or I think this was the time before he died, before recordings.
Yes.
Yeah, he was a bit late. It's important to note that I'm not as big of a history guy as say John, but I do know a bit of history, but I still struggled with recognizing the commanders' names and their ranks and whatnot. I felt like I should have known that. However, I immediately knew who Robert E. Lee was. I did a school project on him once.
Yeah, how'd that go?
It was actually cool as hell because my barber is into Civil War reenacting, and he let me have the costume he wears for a Confederate soldier. I felt like a badass. But then again, I remembered who I was portraying and what he fought for, and that kind of put a damper on that. But still, I got extra credit for that costume.
I will say the uniforms back then were really something.
Mm-hmm. They don't make them like they used to.
No, they sure don't. It's a lot
Yeah.
easier to tell which side you were on back then.
Yeah, after first Bull Run, it got a lot easier.
I remember, I will say there was a lot of interesting I think your average moviegoer or kind of your somebody who's into history, but it's not their primary thing. There's a lot of small details that they probably would miss in this film. Like, I know when we watched it together, Jack asked me, there's a scene, I believe it was outside of Meade's headquarters, and there was one soldier dressed in the Zouave uniform, and Jack is like, "What in the hell is that?" Like, it's like, "What's with Mr. Fancy Pants over here?"
How come I didn't get to wear that outfit for school?
Yeah, Jack, you really felt like a badass then.
Yeah.
But I feel like the movie does provide a lot of opportunities for people to ask questions like that, because then I spent 10 minutes telling him about, who the Zouaves were
Mhm.
and like what their
Mhm.
deal was. So,
Mhm.
but
Yeah, it's a gateway drug. It's a
Gettysburg, the
gateway drug
gateway.
for trying to understand this period of history because it's not a gore fest of a war movie, and it allows people of varying ages to watch it. We can talk about the lost cause narrative of that time like we have been, and saying that okay, we know better now, or we don't put this in mass media, or whatever the case may be. We can look at the uniforms and say, I wonder what that uniform would have felt like if I would have had the chance to wear it. You know, it really is that entryway for so many people. It literally was for me to reenacting, but I think it can be an entryway for people to watch a part of it if they can't sit through the whole thing. Watch a segment of it that you're really interested in. Oh, I want to understand what Pickett's charge was or something, and then go to the battlefield, or look up another video of the thing on YouTube or something. I think it can be a good introduction. I mean, the Ken Burns series on the Civil War is what, 10 episodes or 9 episodes or something like that. Uh, I've never sat through the whole thing in one sitting. So you pick and
That's a
choose.
big ask.
Yeah, so you pick and choose. I think that this movie, in that way, for the younger generations, I'm sounding like an old man, uh, can do that, where it can be like, I just want to watch the little round top sequence, or I just want to watch this and try to get an idea of something. But it's definitely not a documentary, uh, you know. So too many people think this is based on a true story. Yeah, the Battle of Gettysburg happened, but it's actually a historical novel that this is based off of. So we have to keep that in
Right.
mind.
So, speaking of Little Round Top, what did we think of the? I don't even know if scene is the right term for it, considering it's 30 minutes of this film. But what did we think of the portrayal of the Battle of Little Round Top, and what did we think of the portrayal of Joshua Chamberlain?
Oh, well, there's a couple things. One, the real hero of Little Round Top, you only see him for a split second, and that's Gouverneur Warren. He's up there. He's at the officer looking through his binoculars, and the flags from the Signal Corps are waving. That's the
Mm,
guy who went up there, and he's like, "Hey, I think it'd be a good idea to come up here. This is a nice hill. No one's here. It's a nice sunny day, and the enemy's coming this direction. I think we should go here."
well, if only they had listened to Sam Elliott at the beginning of the film.
I tell you, I tell you.
We gotta get the high ground.
So I remember the first time I went to Gettysburg as a kid, I had no idea where I was because I was all of like 7 years old and I was not into history at the time. Like it didn't click yet, you know? And my father took me to Gettysburg for the 125th anniversary of the battle, which tells you how long ago it was because we're getting ready to go into the 160th. So this is 1988. And nobody was talking about Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain at that time. Nobody. What they were talking about was who they were talking about was Gouverneur Warren, the guy up there with the Signal Corps, saying that, hey, we need to put men on this hill because it's kind of tactically important. But Ken Burns and the movie Gettysburg solidified Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain in the minds of Americans as the hero of Little Round Top, and it's never been the same since. He is now deified on that.
Yeah.
And the one other thing that I'll note as a nerd is that he tells his men to pile the rocks high. Okay. Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, the real Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, made the park at the time put up a sign. And if you go to Little Round Top and you stay on basically in that little saddle between Big and Little Round Tops, and you look towards the 20th Main area, you will see the stone wall, but you will see a sign. And the sign says this stone wall was constructed as defensive works on I think it says the night of July 2nd, 1863, or something like the morning of July 3rd, 1863. Chamberlain insisted that sign went up because he didn't want his men to be seen as hiding behind a stone wall. And that wall was not there. It was legitimately not there when his men were there. They fought in the open on the side of the hill. They didn't pile the rocks up high or whatever. And I always thought he's rolling over in his grave right now because the rest of the world is seeing that they're piling the rocks up to hide behind the stones, quote, hide. So I know Chamberlain would not appreciate that part of that.
I find the manliness thing in this film kind of ridiculous.
Mm.
Jack, you remember when Longstreet was talking to God, what was the British colonel's name again?
Fremantle.
Fremantle, yeah. You remember when Fremantle was he was saying he's expecting you to abandon this position and flank him on the other side, but instead you'll be attacking him right where he doesn't expect it. Yeah, because it's stupid.
Good old Arthur. Arthur didn't have a red uniform on either. He would not have that uniform on.
I even mentioned that, like, if a commander actually wore that in battle, how quick do you think he'd get shot?
Yeah, he's a basically he's a observer from England, and he's not bringing that uniform onto the battlefield. He's in civilian garb there.
John mentioned that, like, he wasn't some commander like they assumed he was. He was literally just some guy.
Yeah,
like a tourist.
Europe had sent so many people over to watch the action. That was a big thing in the 19th century. We sent people over to watch the Crimean War in the 1850s. In fact, George B. McClellan was one of those we sent over there to watch what happens during the Crimean War and bring back information.
Now we just watch it on YouTube.
Fremantle's doing the same thing.
How little things change.
Yes, although now we just watch on cell phones.
YouTube and
right, TikTok. Yeah. Yeah.
I will say, though, the Battle of Little Round Top is easily, and I'm sure a lot of people would probably say that for themselves, but it is an impressive scene, and it is very inspiring. I love the scene, just the even though it does look a teeny bit corny, it is still a powerful scene. And it's like you said, there are other people who should probably be raised up higher than Chamberlain, but also, I mean, Chamberlain still did a very impressive and brave thing that day, and obviously he was awarded the Medal of Honor for it. So as much as other people probably deserve as much, if not more, credit than him, I'm not mad about how much he's been propped up, because he's still an impressive individual in his own right.
Sure. Absolutely. I am in no place to say these people weren't brave, or whatever the case may be. He did always, for the rest of his life, he never played down he was never humble about what he supposedly did there. The students at Bowdoin College would watch him walk by, and they would say, "There's the hero of Little Round Top." They'd whisper it around him, and he would always smile and stuff. So he was never the kind to say, "Oh no, it wasn't me; it was my men." It was, he had a pretty big ego, and I guess you have to in some ways. But we talk about Dan Sickles having an ego. Let me tell you, old Joshua had an ego, and his actually, when you guys watch that movie and you watch that part of the movie, his second in command, Spear, um, the guy with the absolutely great facial hair, and
Don't call me Lawrence.
yeah. Well, that's his brother, Tom, but Ellis Spear, who's with him, and he's kind of like his second in command there. They will butt heads after the war because Spear thinks that Chamberlain is glorifying war. And Spear's like, no, it was absolutely atrocious. I don't want anything to do with glorifying this and all this other stuff. So even these two guys who in the movie are very close because they're in combat together and they're fighting this battle together, this tremendous battle on the left flank of the line, they butt heads later on as far as how they see their experience. And I know I'm getting a little deeper than just reviewing the movie, but it really
we take this wherever it goes. So
yeah, but it really opens that door, right, to wonder what these guys actually thought of each other, since this is based on a novel, and
right.
That's the direction it kind of goes.
I found all of these different portrayals very, very interesting. Jack, who is your favorite character in this entire film, or what was your favorite performance?
That one random extra that flew off of Round Top Hill when the cannonball hit him, and then it immediately cut to the next scene. He really stole the show. Or maybe it was the flag guy that was shot, but God bless him, held it off the ground and handed it to the next guy. That was really inspiring. But
I will say, I already expressed an appreciation for God, his name just slipped my mind. Chamberlain, Jeff Daniels.
Jeff Daniels.
I always do a bit of research after watching the movies, and apparently Jeff Daniels. Have you ever seen that TV show where they take celebrities and they do like a genealogy, ancestry type deal for them, and then the whole episode is just kind of explaining the family history for these celebrities? And I think it's an interesting concept because obviously I don't think a lot of people would get into ancestry or that kind of stuff if it wasn't like, oh, this is the cool stuff my favorite celebrity found out. Like, what does it bring to me? But apparently when he took on the role as Joshua Chamberlain, he didn't know this at the time, and it wasn't until he did this ancestry thing, but apparently he's actually descended from one of the soldiers of the 20th Maine who was there that day. Obviously he's not related to Chamberlain himself, but it's weird to see how that kind of history or that story intersects, where you just have an actor who's like, yep, I'm going to sign up for this role because it appeals to me, or it's going to pay me well, what have you. And then, unintentionally, he finds out later he has a direct connection to, this major part of this movie. And, it just makes me think how many other of the extras or other actors have that kind of connection to this battle.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, it's bound to happen. I mean, it's crazy how that does happen with those big name characters, but a lot of us who got into the reenacting hobby because of the movie or beforehand, some of us found out later that we had ancestors at Gettysburg, and we didn't know when we first started. So it's kind of interesting to see that we only learn these things after we get involved in something like that. I didn't know when I first got involved in reenacting that I had Civil War ancestors at Gettysburg, and I know now of two. So yeah, it's pretty cool to see some of the bigger names in the acting world do those kinds of things and then find out, oh, you have a connection to that battle yourself through your genealogy. And I think that's a tremendous thing to watch because it humanizes the role even more.
And Tom Berenger played Longstreet, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
What a
there was
magnificent beard.
there was a movie being filmed in my hometown a couple years ago about I think it was Battle of the Bulge, and I know Tom Berenger as Sergeant Barnes from Platoon, and
Mhm.
he was playing the general in that movie. And I signed up to be an extra there, but I didn't get the role. But a good buddy of mine did, and he looked amazing. He looked like he stepped right out of a portrait of a World War II soldier. But he was on set with Tom Berenger, and apparently Tom Berenger is a really cool guy, like absolutely grounded, amazing. The stories he'd tell. And one of the lines that me and my buddy still quote is during that scene. Obviously, he's stressed because, war, but he has this folder and he says to the, he belts out to the audience, and where's that goddamn intel on those panzers? Or no, where's that intel on those goddamn panzers? We still quote that at each other, like when one of us is like yelling at it about a game or something.
Man, if he had been assertive like that, then maybe Lee would have listened to him.
Yeah, they would
Yeah.
have known about the panzers.
Yeah. Well, let's remember that also Jeff Daniels, after this movie, went and did Dumb and Dumber. So,
Range.
and I'm like, wow, that's a 180 right there. If I ever saw that, Um, but yeah, mine. I think my probably my standout character it's got to be Sam Elliott as Buford. He's too old, but
The
he
high
plays the part
ground.
well. He plays the part well, and obviously Sam Elliott's going to play a cavalry officer. I mean, the
Oh,
guy
he
the
has
guy
to.
can ride a horse like nobody else. So I mean, obviously he's going to be the cav guy.
I think of all the Sam Elliott performances I've seen, this is probably for me the second best. The
Mm.
best one is his portrayal of Sergeant Major Plumley in We Were
Oh yeah,
Soldiers.
oh yeah, yeah.
But the grizzled sergeant, or the tough as nails general, like, he pulls off that role spectacularly. Although,
Mm.
you know, as with many things in this film, his line, and you can't help the lines that he's given, but it was a little ham-fisted, where he's like, "I got it. After the fifth time you say the high ground, I got the importance of
Yeah.
it."
Yeah,
Star
It's
Wars
like
taught me the importance of that.
yeah, yeah.
Obi-Wan Kenobi would be proud of you, Sam Elliott.
And as you historians know, that was the most popular movie requested among soldiers on both sides of the Civil War is Episode 3. I mean,
Which war?
duh.
I mean, come on, it's got to be. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But the coolest thing I think out of the whole movie, at least for me, and the part that I can watch like consistently, is that artillery bombardment before biggest charge, because I've witnessed that kind of thing reenacting, and it's something I will never forget. And so to watch it on film in a way that we couldn't uh, show you that back then, like we didn't have the cell phones and stuff like that, so I would love to do a TikTok live of a 40 gun bombardment of this thing. That'd be freaking amazing. Or drone going overhead while we're blazing away, because the sensory end of this is
I think
amazing, and that's one of my favorite scenes because of that.
I think if I'm not mistaken, uh, the artillery barrage for Pickett's charges, I think that's the only time in this film we get a like aerial crane shot, because everything else seems to be at ground level. I might be mistaken, but I that kind of stuck out to me, because we go like 3.5 hours into this movie and everything's at ground level, and then all of a sudden we get it's zooming out so you can see the entire
Mhm.
gun line, and I'm like, wait a minute, I didn't know he knew how to do this film technique.
Yeah, and then they do it for biggest charge. They do that overhead kind of flyby. In fact, I think I don't know because I wasn't there. I think they used a helicopter for that to go down the line from above.
The
And
days
so,
before drones.
yeah, exactly. It costs a lot more money back then to do that stuff. Uh, but you know, I can't describe how awesome it is to stand behind original Civil War cannons and pull lanyards on them, and you'll hear them with. And back then, when you go to the NPS site today, National Park Service site, there are many rules for firing artillery.
Yeah,
It's
they
like
get
one
really
round.
uptight even
Yeah,
about
I think
just
it's one.
trash.
One. I
So
think it's one round every 10 minutes now.
what?
Somewhere around there. It's a long time. One round every 7 minutes. One round every 10 minutes. Something like that. What they're trying to do is make sure there are no burning embers inside the tube, inside the muzzle, or inside the bore, because you don't want to have a cook off. Well, we used to just sponge the gun all the time with water, and that would take care of most of it. And you seal off the vent hole with a thumb stall, which is a leather thing that you put around your thumb and you stick it there. So that seals off the air. So you're already extinguishing everything inside. But the
Yeah,
NPS went a step further, and they're like, no, you also have to wait like 10 minutes.
it's
Well,
like the guys 150 years ago got this figured out. Like,
right. They knew what they were doing. Um, so back when I started, right after this movie came out, I'm on a gun with guys who were on guns in Vietnam. Okay, and they're not waiting 10 minutes. Okay, and we didn't have that rule back then. We were firing 2 rounds a minute at that time. So when you are seeing these guys in the movie firing these cannons, they are good enough to fire like 2 rounds a minute and keep that going and keep that going. That's Civil War style firing of that. And Maxwell never like held them back from doing that. And on top of that, I think right now it's like 8 ounces of powder or something, is 8 or 9 ounces of powder is what they give you at the NPS now,
oh, for like
uh,
a blank charge.
for a blank charge. Yeah, we were firing 2.5 pounds. Or yeah, we were firing full war. We were firing full war rounds, is what we called them. So it was like
Damn.
it was. We would do a nice round, quote unquote, which is 2.5 pounds, or we would do a reenactment round, which was 2 pounds. So two sticks of dynamite is what it sounds like going off. And when you see the guns in the movie, you see them recoil. That's because there's 2 pounds to 2.5 pounds of powder coming out the end of that. It's a lot of force. It's about 140 decibels. It's about like staying next to a jet engine when it goes off. And we're just pounding away with this thing over and over. And you see it in this movie, and I'm like, that's the last time that we really see this on film in a massive scale where you're seeing this like, yeah, that smoke is legit. That's what it looked like. And the sound, and we were setting car alarms off in parking lots, hundreds of yards away, because we're just blazing away with this stuff. So when I watch the movie, it harkens back to that time when we didn't have to, wait so long to fire the next round, or we didn't have to worry about the amount of powder we use. We used what that gun said it was, like what you're supposed to use in that gun,
What it was rated for.
what it was rated for. And none of us used earplugs, which is why I have problems hearing today.
Huh?
I mean, yeah, I mean, you run the gun for 10 years with no earplugs, you're gonna have some long-term effects. And but that movie reminds me of that, and I will watch that bombardment, and then I'll just turn it off, because I'm like, that's all I need to see. I just want to see that again and hear that. And it's just one of those things, guys, where you don't have to watch all 4 hours. You want to see what it looked like. That's probably the most authentic part of that movie, is that bombardment. Because and the little round top scenes, like you say, are pretty intense. But if I gotta watch one scene, that's it. That's the one I'm watching.
That artillery scene actually caused me to be very cranky, because obviously we've mentioned everybody gets their speech, everybody gets their send my regrets to General Hancock, all that stuff.
Right.
Um, but a lot of the times that we're having these speeches, I was telling Jack, um, it wouldn't have been at that rate that we see at before Pickett's charge, but during the Battle of Gettysburg, the artillery fire would have been more or less nonstop, just
Mhm.
during the 3 day span. And it was just infuriating to me to have these scenes where like Longstreet is talking to Lee, or Chamberlain sitting on the top of Big Round Top after his big battle, and it's just perfectly silent in the background, and they're just having their conversation, and then we get to the next battle scene, and then we see get the big cacophony of explosions, and I'm like, could we not have recorded maybe like 10 minutes of artillery fire and just looped it into the background? Just I don't know if that would have been too big of an ask, but it really just it made it hard for me to focus on when they were talking, because I'm like, there's stuff missing here.
Hmm. Hmm. There's definitely sound going on in other parts of the line at that time. The men often talked about having hours of just lull. There's nothing going on. There's a lull in the fight,
Yeah.
and it's just quiet. And the men so much talked about how their ears hurt when it was quiet because they're so used to hearing the guns going off and stuff. So I mean, they even talk about the federal soldiers, the U.S. Army soldiers, right before the bombardment starts on the third day. They're on the stone wall, just trying to get something to eat and chat and talk, and they're like, all of a sudden, just one lone gun fires, and then there's a pause, and then all hell breaks loose. So they can pick out one gun out of that entire line across from them, and they say, "Oh, I wonder what that is," and then all of a sudden, it all lights up. So there are some instances where you have these lulls where it's like there's nothing going on. People are moving into position, or getting some grub for the first time in hours, if not a couple days, and they're like, oh, now all of a sudden this 120 gun bombardment starts, out of nowhere.
Okay,
Yeah.
so it wasn't like continuous, but
Hmm.
um, I feel like a battle of that size, it's hard to think of it as being that quiet in as many times as we see in this film.
Yeah, there's definitely something going on some part of the line. There might be a lull on one end and not the other, or one end's getting hit and not the other one, or the center's not getting hit. There's definitely something going on somewhere on that line. I mean, you're talking 150,000 men in one space, in a tight space, considering these are the same numbers of men we had in Normandy in the invasion. And you're putting them in this little area and saying, go ahead, fight it out, as soon as you see somebody. So yeah, it's going to be a lot of sound going on, and either directly in front of you or off in the distance.
Man, imagine how tense those times of just quiet were. You're in the middle of a war, nothing's going on, you're probably going out of your mind waiting.
Yeah, yeah, and you're there with everyone you grew up around.
And
These units are made up of guys who grew up together. They're from your local area.
and you just can't shake that feeling of
Mhm.
knowing that across the field about a mile away there's either a cannonball, a bayonet, or a musket ball with your name on it, and it could be any one of them.
Yeah, there's no doubt some of those soldiers of the U.S. Army saw those guns lining up on the other side of the field, and they knew something was going to happen sooner or later. They're not lining up for the fun of it, and so you're absolutely right, Jack. Where it builds that tension, and then you start playing the mind game of, okay, when's this going to start, and how's this going to end, and you know am I going to survive this, and so much more. uh, that that part of the battle will always, that third day will always be the most talked about. It's definitely one of the most, how should I say it, most mythologized of that battle. people still walk the picket charge field, like, and they reminisce and they talk about it. So yeah, it's one of those things where I don't know what it would have been like to have been a soldier on that line, looking out across there, just waiting for something to happen. It had to be one of the most tense moments, until the only thing I could say it's probably close to is when we have our guys in the First World War, who know the enemy's just over there. I wonder if they're going to come over here today or not.
Yep.
You know.
There's only so much you can do to kill the boredom and the tension.
Yeah. Yeah. And these guys do some crazy stuff to kill the boredom and tension. You think, our generation in the early days of GWAT, as we call it, with Global War on Terror, we have all the videos to show how crazy our generation can be in the field because you're trying to break that tension. These guys were no different. They were doing stupid stuff to each other, and they were picking on each other, and they were teasing each other with loaded weapons.
I remember I remember reading, and granted, this is from the American Revolution, but the diary of Joseph Plum Martin.
Mm-hmm.
He talks about it in one of his accounts where some of the members of his company went to go play a trick on a guy that they didn't really like. And what they did was they took some black powder and put it underneath a bucket that he likes to sit on and then lit it off. And it sent him flying like 10 feet in the air.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, that stuff happened a lot. These guys are young guys. They're, some of them are 14 years old. They're 16 years old. They're 20. And it's like, yeah, I remember what I was like at that age. If I was bored, I'd probably be doing some stupid stuff to people just to pass the time along, because that's what you do. And I think we put these guys on such a pedestal sometimes, and make them to be, we mythologize them, like I'm saying, like we do with Chamberlain. We do it with the guys on the line too, and we say that, I've heard people say, "Oh, they never ducked when bullets came their way. They just walked straight ahead." And I'm like, no, these guys were leaning into it, and they were scared to death, and they talked about it. So I think it's really cool though to find those little nuggets of when their immaturity, if you will, shows through, when they're like, we got to do something to break this monotony or I'm going to go crazy, and they do these little things to each other while they're waiting, even while they're waiting on the line for that massive bombardment to happen on July 3rd. They know something's coming. They just don't know when or where, so they might as well have some fun until it happens. And, they're picking on each other constantly along there. There was a great story from one of the Union Army's commanders on. He was around the Bryan Farm, which is near Ziegler's Grove, close to the high water mark there where Pickett's charge came through. And some Confederates came across there during Pickett's charge and were taken prisoner. They were pinned down and they surrendered. And a pretty good amount of them. And what they didn't know was that the Federals were pretty beat up in that part. The artillery bombardment really slapped them, and then they had this infantry attack. And one of the officers, one of these Confederate officers, came up past there as a prisoner with some of his men, and he looked around and he said, if I would have known there was only this many of you, I wouldn't have surrendered. And the federal officer looked at him and goes, well, you can go back and try again if you'd like. And it's just these little snide comments where it's like their humanity, like, bring them down from these statues and show that they can be a wise ass, that they
See you in
can
hell, Billy Reb or Johnny Reb. And
that they can pick on each other, that they can be that because they're human. That's the beauty of the story, is that they were like us in that way, or we're kind of like them, and it just so happened we're 160 years apart. And that's why I hate when people are like, oh, this generation wouldn't be able to do that. And it's like, they did it, and they were the young kids at that time. I think we need to look at movies like this and say, we would have been stuck in that situation, and I'm glad we're not. And who knows what it would have been like but it's showing the humanity is a great thing, and there are those little vignettes in the movie Gettysburg where it kind of comes through a little bit, and you get to see some guys on the line. But the way Jack said about it, making it like a 10-part or a 5-part Band of Brothers like thing is what I'm still waiting for in the mid 19th century world, where you take like U.S. Army soldiers at a certain battle or whatever, and you do something like that where you get to learn the characters and you get to understand them for who they are, and each individual character has their individual little things, just like all three of us talking here. We have our own individual ways of doing things and mannerisms and all that, and then put them into this massive uh, uh, thresher of this meat grinder of Civil War combat, and watch it unfold. I think that would be very instrumental in having us restart the conversations about the war in a different way, because I think we've sanitized it too much with things like Gettysburg, because you see these guys, like you say, flying through the air, and there's no body parts flying off. It's like
Right.
there'd be stuff
Well,
flying everywhere.
that is something that me and Jack have discussed quite a bit. Is so when we did our review of The Alamo, that film was rated PG-13, and one of our things that we said was if this movie had gone for that hard R rating, it probably would have been improved by at least like 25%.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd have to imagine, I get trying to make films, obviously this is more set out as an educational goal type film than it is entertainment. Um, but it doesn't make one bit of sense to me to have, like we said, the one of the most famous battles in North American history be a PG rated film.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't equate. And it's like you said with sanitization, like this was a bloody and gruesome battle, and this film does a disservice to how violent this battle actually was. I get, just like with the Alamo, if this movie was bumped up from a PG to a PG-13, I think it would have made quite a bit of difference. Just because, you know, this isn't Disney producing Mulan, which is also on our war movie list.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the thing: is Disney's Mulan has a much different goal than a movie like Gettysburg.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and Gettysburg wasn't designed to be marketed to a 7 or 8 year old, even though a lot of 7 year and 8 year olds did go and see it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's kind of like I saw Black Hawk Down come out in theaters the day it was released, and I was about 7 or 8 when that happened. Black Hawk Down was 100% not designed for a 7 or 8 year old to
Mm-hmm.
see, and obviously they're each parent's going to have to make their own choice as far as what their kids are going to be seeing, but I couldn't imagine seeing Black Hawk Down in a PG format. It just would not do justice to that topic, just kind of like doing PG for Gettysburg is not doing justice to how horrific this thing actually was.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's well said. I think that would be the thing that would help us understand what we can really do to each other in a civil war. We haven't really seen that in film, and I think that would help us to get past this kind of cleanliness and making conflict between each other easy. That's what scares me is when we make it easy to have conflict between each other because we have disagreements, and we say, well, they did it so we can do that, and it's like, but you're missing the point. You watch Gettysburg and you don't see the 5,000 bodies that are laying out there and need to be buried, the 7,000, or excuse me, the 7,000 bodies that need to be buried, the 5,000 animals that need to be buried or burned, You don't see Camp Letterman and on the massive hospital structures. You don't see the piles of limbs. You don't see any of that. Glory tries to bring that across in the hospital scene, which was a great scene, other than the fact the guy was probably under anesthesia. We had plenty to go around, but bringing that to life and saying this is bloody. This is the battle scene, the Antietam battle scene in Glory is absolutely incredible. And if anyone hasn't seen that, just watch that one.
See,
it's absolutely incredible.
we actually did watch that in my middle school history class, but I was sick the day they finished it off, and I'm still bitter about that.
Well, someday we'll get around to Glory.
Yes.
Glory was the epitome at that time, and it's rated R. So again, John, we're going to your point of you bump that up and you showcase it for what it quote could have looked like, and you put it up there and you give it that R rating to show how raw and emotional and dirty war really is. Then you can do something with that. And I think that we just got to the point where we made it too clean and too easy, and we got comfortable enough for a 12-year-old kid to say, I want to do that. So it was really a reenactment movie, instead of a movie to make you think about the costs, because everybody got up at the end and everybody clapped.
Right.
So, and I think that's what it is. We have
3 cheers for Virginia, boys.
Yeah, we have in our minds we have placed these guys on the reenactment field, and I think that really does a huge disservice to them, because we're used to people doing the reenactments and getting up and walking off the field, and you move on with your life. And I think that if we had something like Glory or a Band of Brothers or the Pacific or something to that effect, I think that would really restart a conversation in a new way for your generation of historians and the next generation of historians, because now we're seeing it as we do with the new All Quiet on the Western Front, where some people say it's too grotesque, and I'm like, it's the First World War. It's going to be grotesque. It's going to be ugly. It's not daisies and stuff happening here. So I think that would be the one thing. It's been 30 years. And we've often said, does the Ken Burns series need to be remade with the new and updated information? Well, does Gettysburg need to be remade, but in a new way? Maybe with
I'm sure you're going to get a lot of
series.
You're going to get a lot of upset people with that statement.
Yeah. There have been. We're still engaged in that conversation. Does the Ken Burns series need to be remade?
Well, that goes back to the Shelby Foote obviously was a big proponent of Lost Cause and leaning into that. So I remember we watched the entire Ken Burns series in high school, and even though we were in a transitioning period of history education as far as Civil War goes, you still have it is the preeminent Civil War documentary. So you got a lot of people who are still getting influenced by those old views.
Right. And no one's made a better one yet. I can't point you to one. I mean, A&E tried with Civil War journals. I was involved in the shooting for Civil War Combat, and that was decent. But again, we're talking about combat. We're not talking about why we're combating. We got to get to the heart of why they're even out there in the first place.
That's a difficult question. We don't talk about that.
Yeah. We don't want to make anybody uncomfortable with that. But history is the original F your feelings.
Right.
Yep.
You gotta look at the primary sources and what do they say, and who was the audience, and what are they trying to tell you with that document. We can't look past the secession documents because we can't look past our own Declaration of Independence, and that was their declarations of independence. So sorry, it's there, and this movie tried to gloss that over in a way, and just make it a combat movie, which wasn't even a bloody combat movie.
Well, you see, we're just a bunch of gentlemen trying to leave a club.
That's right. They made it into a large duel, basically, and it was good for the time. But I would really love to see, like Jack said, I'd really love to see a short 3 to 5 part Netflix style miniseries that really gets to the heart of the matter as far as what it was like for these guys on the line. And I know that many people would be revolted by it, and that's all the better because I want you to be revolted about Civil War. I don't want you to
Yeah.
think it's easy.
Yeah, there's nothing about a war that should make you be like, yeah, that looks fun.
I read this really good quote by Sherman years after the Civil War when he was giving a speech at like a West Point graduation. And I'm sure you two have heard it, but it starts off like, I see in every one of you the desire to become like me, to lead your nation to glory in the face of battle. And then he just bluntly tells them, yeah, no, it's all moonshine. Like, you don't want to become me. Like, the things I've seen on the war path will stay with you for life. War is a terrible thing, and I pray none of you see it in your lifetimes. He was very blunt, Sherman.
Yeah,
Well,
in all things.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you kind of have to be blunt when you burn half a country to the ground.
No.
Yeah.
He, it was one of those things where he knew better than a lot of them how the war was going to go. He told them early on. He told the people in Washington, "This is going to be a long war. This isn't going to be short." And they said, "You're crazy, old man. Just get out of here." And then they brought him back because they're like, "Yeah, this guy's not so crazy. He's he knows that this is going to be bad." And the things that he did that is up for another podcast, I'm sure. It's the same thing that was done in the French and Indian War around Quebec City. It was the same thing that was done in the sacking of how many places in Europe. It was nothing new. And my hometown was burned by rebels. So, I mean,
Atlanta. No, wait, that was different. Yeah,
Chambersburg.
Atlanta was burned by the Union.
My hometown of Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, was burned by rebels in 1864. Held for ransom and then burned.
My home state wasn't even in the United States at the time, so we kind of sat this one out.
Speaking of having your hometown burned, what'd you think about that scene with Lee where I think it's his subordinate major, his like camp to aide, was talking to him, and he's like, "This army will comport themselves with the utmost respect to the local civilian populace." I'm like, hold up.
Yeah. That's hilarious. I had relatives. They had all their horses stolen 3 times by the Confederate Army. Once in 1862 by Jeb Stuart's raid, 63 by Lee's invasion of the North, and 64 when they came to burn the town. They took all the horses from my family's farms around there and the livestock and everything else they could do. Didn't get anything in return. They also, as many people know now and have to embrace this fact, they also kidnapped a lot of black people from around my hometown and sent them south into slavery. So when we look at the movie Gettysburg, you don't see one black person other than the one person who's supposed to be a runaway.
Yeah, and he doesn't say anything either.
No, and that Confederate Army had a lot of enslaved people with them. And who's doing all the work in the camps? They say it themselves. The Confederate soldiers tell you themselves that they have all these camp aides and stuff. Yeah, they're camp aides, all right. They're enslaved people. And they pick up more when they come through Upper Maryland, Lower Pennsylvania, all the way up to the Susquehanna. That's why Abraham Bryan, the Bryan farm, like I mentioned earlier, he got his family out because he was a free person of color. There were others from Gettysburg who were black, who got the heck out of there because they heard what had happened in my town of Chambersburg and Mercersburg, which is beyond us to the southwest. the Confederates hit there first before they made this big arch into Chambersburg. There was a part of the town called Little Africa. And Little Africa was a little spot where people of free persons of color had come to after they had crossed the Mason-Dixon line. The Army of Northern Virginia cleaned that out and took people out of there and back into a state of slavery. So this isn't an innocent movement of people into Pennsylvania and they're there for flapjacks and a good time. Okay. So we have to remember that, and people take that so personally when I bring that up, and I say you're not the one who did it.
Right.
I'm
But
actually a descendant of someone who enslaved someone. So he was from North Carolina back in the 1700s. I don't take that personally. I see it as my duty to say that was wrong, But some people,
right.
but the thing with Gettysburg and the movie Gettysburg was it showcased how some people will defend the honor of their ancestors, which that's fine, by defending the cause they fought for, which I always thought was weird. You can say your ancestor was brave on the battlefield. Anyone who can face that is brave on the battlefield. There's no way I would question that. But to say that their cause was just on top of that, I think is where the folly is. And I don't get that. I don't understand that. And I don't know if I ever will.
I think it's one thing to be proud of your. I don't know if pride is the right word I want to be. I think it's one thing to have an appreciation for your family history,
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
but it's like you said, you can appreciate the fact that an ancestor of yours was a part of a particular period of time and at a particular event. You don't have to agree with it or align yourself with it to still appreciate their role in it.
That's right. That's right. Your ancestor may have hated your guts.
Yeah, if I met my ancestor from 150 years ago, something tells me we would not see eye to eye on about 99% of things.
Right. You can respect them as your ancestor, as your blood, which you should respect them as. I'm not telling anybody to disrespect their ancestors, but that doesn't mean you're going to agree on everything and you have to agree with everything they did. And that's the thing. This movie really didn't allow us to have that conversation because it wasn't made for that conversation, and it was at a time where we weren't having these conversations. Which is why I'm so glad that we are to the point where we are in the history field, at least, and we are moving in a better direction. On top of that, we can have these conversations now, and we don't have to be like, "Oh, I don't fit in." Well, this is the accepted thing now, and it should be that we have these kinds of conversations that go a little bit deeper than just the movie. It goes to the point of what was the mindset when this movie was made, and how have we changed? Because historical memory is fluid; it's always changing, and we're having these conversations all the time, and it's perfectly acceptable to do that. And I'm constantly learning. We're always going to be students. And I will admit when I'm wrong because I've been wrong many times. But I think that understanding that we have a lot to learn is the key instead of saying we know so much. I don't like to say that. I like to say I have a lot to learn. So, it's when we shut ourselves off and say, I don't want to hear it anymore. I know what's best for XYZ. I don't want to hear anymore. That's where we face a problem, and I think that really showcases where I've come from reenacting in the 90s when certain things were accepted to now. 30 years can make a hell of a difference, guys.
It definitely can.
And getting back to the point from earlier, I know for a fact both sides of my ancestors would hate me. But yeah, they're dead. Fuck them.
That's one way of looking at it.
Hey, it's like I said, you can respect them, but that doesn't mean you have to agree with them. So, that's
so. For our listeners at home, obviously they can't see us, but I saw you just finished up your what did you have, Coke Zero there?
Oh yeah, I'm a big Coke Zero guy.
We part of our shows we have a recurring thing where we talk about our drinks of the evening. Usually we do something of the alcoholic nature, but
Mhm.
I let Jack know in commemoration of your upcoming 10-year of sobriety, we have both switched to non-alcoholic for this episode.
Wow, thank you so much. Thank you.
So,
I'm honored.
well, it's a big achievement.
Thank you. Thank you. That's something else. I've broken the mold in my family. I'm the fourth generation alcoholic, and I'm the only one who went sober. So I'm sure some others would not like me. I'm fine with that. But thank you for that, guys. I, I don't want you to think you have to not drink for me. I'm perfectly okay with other people drinking. It's just I don't have the
Uh,
on off
Yeah,
switch.
out of respect.
yeah,
Thank you.
like
Thank
I
you.
said, 10 years is it's a big milestone. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very
what do you have?
impressive.
What are you having tonight, Jack?
Only the finest water that Taco John's has to offer. I know I was going to make tea, but I forgot we were recording at 7 p.m. I thought we were doing it our usual time. So I kind
Yeah,
of had to rush.
this one was is a little different for us because obviously you're on the East Coast, Jack is
Right.
in Central, and I'm in Mountain Time Zone. So scheduling gets a little tricky sometimes.
I think this is the first time I've ever done a podcast or live stream or anything like that where we're in three different time zones. So this is interesting.
It's always it's always one of the first questions I ask because I have yet to come across a guest who is willing to come on who lives in the same time zone as me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I was like, really? Like, because I live in Colorado. And if you look at the population reports, you would think it wouldn't be that difficult to find a guest who also lives in the mountain time zone, but
Right.
it's harder than you think.
Huh. Yeah, we take it for granted here on the East Coast. We're like, oh, East Coast time. Everyone will know
Yeah, because
about
all the
that.
TV shows are on Eastern time, and
Right.
you have to adjust from there.
Right. Exactly. So yeah, yeah, I have to watch out for that myself too, because I'm talking with people from England and um, Australia and other places for my interviews, and I'm like, oh yeah, I got to get a calculator out to figure out what time, what time this is, and you know, because I'm like, I'll talk to you at 10, which is 3 your time. So I get it, I understand.
How's it feel to be on the other end of the podcast interview format? Because I know that's how I originally came across you was your podcast. So is it kind of a nice refreshing change to be the focus of attention?
It's more relaxing because I'm not running anything. I'm just being myself, and that really helps a great deal. I do love uh, I do love my stuff as far as like running live streams or recording or whatever the case may be. I love the technical aspect of it. But once in a while, it's great to come on other programs and just chill and hear what other people have to say, and be a guest. So it doesn't happen a lot because I'm so overwhelmed with bringing people on my stuff and filling my schedule with that. But it is a nice change, and I do enjoy it just as much as I do hosting things. My thing was always I wanted to be on the radio, and so I like to be like producing and editing and getting people, you know, to email me back when they do, and to talk about books and stuff like that. So it is a nice little change of pace to be on your show, guys, and to be hanging out with you, and to just kick back and relax and drink my soda and talk about nerdy stuff.
I'm glad.
I like to joke that this podcast was my early midlife crisis.
Mutual friend of ours said the same daddy issues that drive women to sex work drive men to make podcasts.
Wow, that's good. I like that. I like that. Yeah, my midlife crisis is going to get my PhD. That's my midlife crisis.
Your
And
midlife crisis is a lot more productive than ours.
yeah, well, you never know. I mean, you know, but I think the whole thing is we've talked so much about Gettysburg, about Civil War, about other war movies, that this is why this chapter of my life has kind of shifted and closed, is because I've been doing it since I reenacted for 25 years, and I'd done history for years. And now it's time to focus on like the technical end of things and digital humanities and technology, because sometimes you scratch that itch, and you're like, okay, I can't talk about Gettysburg much more as far as like going there and doing a live thing, which is my privilege, kind of showing that I grew up 25 miles away. But some of us get to that point where we're like, well, what else can I do? And I'm to that point now where I want to keep the live streams going, the podcast going, because I love that stuff. It's just the focus is changing for me. And one of you two or both of you might get to that point where you're like, hey, I'm not going to forget this, but let's transition to something in the same parallel course that still gets that fire going, but maybe not as we've done it before, and that's perfectly fine. And I think far too many of people in my generation and possibly in your generation, we get stuck in these kind of things where we're like, well, I got to keep grinding and do this and do this and do this, when it's like, yeah, you can still do that, but you don't have to talk about that exact thing. So I'm in that point where it is like a midlife crisis, where it is kind of like, do I go a new routes for the next 20 years, or do I keep doing the same things I've been doing, and I want a challenge. And so that's why I even jumped on Twitch originally, was I wanted a challenge, and I started building the YouTube channel because I wanted a challenge, because I never learned any of that stuff. I graduated from my master's degree program in 2013. We didn't even learn digitization. And so now I had to learn all this. So this is like the next step in the process. And I'm working behind the scenes on some collaborations with podcasts and for the future and into 2024. And so what you guys are doing is going to be part of this large community of podcasters who want to have their voice heard, literally. But it's going to add to this historical narrative in different ways, because we could talk about the same thing on our podcast, but it's going to come across 2 or 3 different ways. And that's the beauty of what we do, because it's all a fingerprint and everyone's different. Sorry, I wanted to preach there for a moment.
No, that was beautiful.
Yeah, no, I've grown wiser in my old age, and sobriety helped.
So I think it's about that time to rate the film. So
before that, I'd like to add something.
okay, you make your point, and then we'll get to the rating.
Earlier, we were talking about what was that brigade called? The snappily dressed ones.
The Zouaves.
Zua. We were talking about the Zuas, and that led into a discussion about that particular part of Civil War history. And you, John, mentioned that it's a gateway. And I was going to build on top of that. Like, there's so many examples of like gateway drugs. Like, say, for example, you're 7 years old and you watch one documentary on the History Channel, and then boom, you're a depressed adult listening to a history podcast at 3 a.m. because you've lost control of your life. And that's where we come in. That's our niche.
Hey, someone's in that same boat. You're never alone.
You know what? There's more than one person who's lost control of their life, because I've seen our listening metrics. So
what are our metrics?
I mean, I'm a 42-year-old guy who's trying to do TikToks. I mean, come on. Come on. It's
hey,
like,
one of my favorite TikTokers is like this 90-year-old woman who she's just got the greatest attitude in the world, where everybody's like, "Oh, you're so beautiful. You just wore that outfit great." And she's like, "I know."
But as you were saying, John, continue.
So I think it's about that time we rate the film. So I don't know if you're familiar with our rating system, but what we do is we come up with a a custom rating that's only applicable to this film. It's usually on a scale of 1 to 5, whatever objects. And then after we've each given our rating and reason for that rating, we check it against the Rotten Tomatoes thermometer and see how close we are. So, what do we think the metric should be for the movie Gettysburg?
What do you think, Jack?
See, I was thinking maybe X number of charges out of 10.
Out of 10?
Yeah.
We're going to 10 now? Okay.
Or 5, if that's a more manageable
John, how many do you
number.
want? Do you want 5?
Yeah, sure. Let's do 1 to 5
5.
charges.
1 to 5
Yeah,
charges.
1 or 5 charges.
Wow. Okay. Who wants to go first?
I'll go first.
Okay.
I'd give this movie about 3 to 3.5 charges out of 5. Yeah, it's just a PG Gettysburg movie, and all the issues we were talking about that you guys covered better than I could put into words.
He had a lot more to say last week when we were doing Starship Troopers.
Oh, I wouldn't have anything to say about that. I've never watched that.
Oh man,
it is fantastic.
I was
film.
There.
Yeah, I don't know.
It's a great historical documentary. If you're ever
5 out of 5 cockroaches.
Yeah.
Wow.
Would you like to know more?
Wow. I'll go listen to that episode next. You know what? I say that this is the top 2 Civil War movies of all time, and that's personal opinion, obviously, and it has a little bit of nostalgia involved and stuff like that. However,
respect.
Yeah. However, what I will say is that I see it for what it is, and I've seen many great movies in my life, and I have to agree partially with Jack here, and I have to give it 3.5. Because of the fact that there are so many historical shortcomings with it that are major themes. Not the uniforms are wrong or whatever else, but the major things we talked about gloss over the true impact of what the war was about and what the combat was about. So I will say that that's the shortcoming that I see. So I'm going to go, I would go 4, but I'm not feeling it. Like Glory to me is like a 4 or 5. So I'm going to go 3-5 on this one.
Okay.
Seems fair.
And E2, John.
Oh man, this one it's a really hard one for me to rate. There are scenes in this that I love. I love the little round top charge scene. I love the scene where Lee is talking to Jeb Stewart. There's not time for that now. Like,
just interrupts him.
Right.
There's some great performances in this. I thought Jeff Daniels did a great job. I thought Martin Sheen did a great job as Lee. Even though there was issues with his portrayal and there was issues with the portrayal of Longstreet, I thought Longstreet was a really interesting character in this film. The thing that kills me is if you go into this movie not knowing anything about the battle or the Civil War, you are going to get a very skewed image of what this was and what the conflict was. And that bothers me more than the good performances make up for it in my mind. Me as a history nerd, it was a tough film to watch. I had to stop. I took this film in probably 3 different chunks, and for that reason, this is a movie that was made by reenactors for reenactors. It's not a movie made for the general public. It's not made even for history buffs, really. It is a reenactor film, and I think it has its place. And even though I enjoy the film, I have to give it one charge.
Wow.
And it's
Damn.
it's going to be
Wow.
one charge up the little round top, not even a Pickett's charge.
Wow.
What? Whoa.
That is my hot take.
Wow.
That is a very hot take, as the kids say. Indeed.
So come at me, Twitter.
Man, you're gonna alienate our southern listeners.
Yeah.
All three of them.
You're gonna start another civil war.
Yes.
Well, we lost all our Texas listeners after the Alamo, so
Yeah, that was my bad.
So what does Rotten Tomatoes even give this thing?
Oh,
It's like-
right.
oh yeah, we got to see where we landed.
Yeah,
So
what the-
Gettysburg.
I've never looked this up. I don't know. I just
Rotten Tomatoes is an interesting place because
Oh, yeah.
Very.
it either lands exactly where you think it is, or it is completely off base of where you think a film should be.
So, for the audience score, they gave it an 89%. The tomometers gave it a 77%.
No
And-
way.
For the first time in this podcast history, I got to go with the critics on this one. Like, I usually side on the audience members because that's where I find myself, audience. I'm not a critic. But yeah, I think this is the first time I've ever sided with the critics. I think they more or less got it right on this one.
And the critics were at 77.
Critics were 77 and the audience was 89%.
So John is at 20%.
Yeah, dang, John.
Wow. We're about
What do I
right
know?
there. 70% would be ours. So there you go.
Well, it just goes to show you guys are better at reviewing films than me.
It just goes to
We're
show
mo-
everybody's a critic.
Yeah, we're more merciful, I think, is the word.
Yeah. Yeah. I put nostalgia points in there. So yeah.
But I think so. Usually, what we do after this is we usually pick or decide our next film. But before we get to that, obviously you mentioned being involved with YouTube and Twitch and all that. So if you want to take this moment to hop on the soapbox and preach the good word of the tattooed historian and let us know about all the things you got going on and any big exciting things that you want the people to know about, have at it.
Oh, well, thank you. Basically, you can go on to most social media platforms and just look up the Tattooed Historian. I'm sure you'll find me on there. I even have an OnlyFans, but I don't use it. Yet. If it gets really bad, we may have to do something here.
We'll see how your student loan situation turns out.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I went back to school, because I have to stop paying on them. Anyway, but no, really, if you go to any social media site, the major ones, you'll find me. Just look up the Tattooed Historian. You'll find me on YouTube. You'll find me on Twitch. The only one that's different is Twitter. It's Inked Historian, because the Tattooed Historian doesn't fit. But everything else is the Tattooed Historian. And I kind of, play the long game with this whole thing, where you're getting a little piece of the puzzle on each social media site. So what you see on Twitch is going to be slightly different than what you'll see on YouTube. The YouTube channel is growing, and I want to thank everybody for helping me with that. The podcast is called The Tattooed Historian Show. So don't mean to plug in our podcast on a podcast, but
well, that's why we brought you here.
We'll work together on that. But yeah, I've been working on that since 2018 or so, and it's been fun off and on, but it's been working out okay. And projects I have in the future, a lot of author interviews coming up that will be seen on my YouTube channel. We're going to be doing some trivia nights as well, possibly on Twitch. So I'm going to do a Trivia Maker quiz series, and we'll be doing that on my Twitch channel here coming up. No prizes just yet, just bragging rights, and we'll come up with ideas for that, and maybe co-hosts as well. So instead of regular gaming, we'll do some trivia with the chat, and all of you can join in, and we can have trivia nights every once in a while. We're also doing a lot of top 3 events on YouTube where we pick out our top 3 whatever. And we're going to be doing the latest one will be top 3 cartoons of the 1980s. So you can see I'm trained as a military historian, but I'm tired and I want to do other stuff. So we're doing music and we're doing cartoons and we're doing all this other stuff. So
I better see G.I. Joe on that list.
Yep. I was about to say that.
I'm not giving you my list. You have to watch and find out. I'm going to be joined by Blake Scott Ball is coming on. He and I did top 3 of the 90s cartoons. He wrote a book on Peanuts, the comic strip Peanuts. And
I have his book at my Amazon wish list.
There you go. He is getting ready to write a book on Batman. So this is going to be an awesome one. How awesome is that? You can be a professor and write about comics and all that stuff. It's great. History is fantastic. But that's where you can find me online. Anywhere you find the Tattooed Historian, just look me up and you will find me.
Yeah, I just subscribed to you. Also,
the podcast already netted you another follower.
See? Thank you, Jack.
That's a net gain for you.
Yeah,
but I'm definitely interested in your Twitch trivia.
Yeah, that'd be great. That'd be great. I have a list of ideas for the trivia, like overall. I just have to come up with questions. So it's going to be interesting coming up with like 30 or 40 questions to do like a 2-hour event with breaks. But it'll be fine. We'll work it out.
And me and Jack were quite competitive at trivia in college. There was a local bar that the winning trivia team got a $50 gift certificate.
And a glass.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
And
we never won, but we did beat the professor team once, though. So
that's all that matters.
This method that I'm going to be doing this at, for anyone listening and for you guys, you'll be able to either scan a QR code on your screen, or you'll just type in a website address, a short one with a code, and then you'll be able to use your cell phones as your devices to pick out your stuff. So you can pick your answers that way. So it's very interactive, and the quicker you do it, the more points you get. And it's like Whose Line Was It Anyway? The points don't matter, but it's just it's bragging rights. So we'll have some fun with that.
I'm glad to hear that, because there's a bar trivia in the town I'm in that I used to go to, but the woman putting it on caught a DUI and now is not allowed in bars, so there's no trivia anymore.
That is not why I quit drinking, by the way, everybody listening.
So if I finally get to do trivia again, which is upsetting to me because I was like in the top 10 teams of that league.
Well, you can get back involved in this. We'll do it on Twitch.
Yeah, I love trivia. I'm just a goldmine of useless knowledge in my head.
Aren't we all?
Right.
That's why we do history.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing. So I'm on this podcast.
There you go.
He's here for the comedic relief.
Yeah, I'm the goofball. You're the tattooed historian. He's the history apprentice, and I'm just a guy who really liked History Channel as a kid.
Does that fit into a username or?
No.
Okay.
No.
That definitely sounds too long for Twitter.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Coincidentally,
Elon
history
didn't
is
allow
also
that.
my best subject in school.
So, speaking of plugs, if you like the show, leave a review. Stars do matter. You can find Armchair Commanders podcast on Facebook and Instagram. Give those a follow. We also have a YouTube channel. It's my YouTube channel. It's History Apprentice on YouTube, but that's where you can find another place for our episodes. For next week, Jack, sorry to steal your thunder on this one, but we have another guest coming on, and by the guest rules, that means they get to choose the movie.
Naturally.
So next week, I'm excited to announce that we will have JD from the History Underground channel joining us. And he is really big in the YouTube game. He's at like 500,000 subscribers right now. Real popular guy. And he has chosen, and I'm shocked by this given the amount of Civil War content he himself produced, but he has chosen The Monuments Men, starring George Clooney, John Goodman, and the other guys. His name's escaping me. He was in Greatest Beer Run Ever as the bartender.
Ah, that guy. The
Yeah.
Colonel.
Guy.
Yeah. Ghostbusters.
Bill Murray.
Yeah, there we go.
There you
Bill
go.
Murray too.
Nothing but the net.
So, if I remember correctly, that came out in 2013 and is about the arts division of the U.S. Army, whose job was to try and prevent art from being destroyed during the advance across Europe. So that is what we will be discussing next week. Jack, do you have anything before we sign off?
Nothing. I've had Monuments Men on my list, so that's going to be exciting.
I am interested to see how that one turns out. I remember seeing it in theaters, and I'll have to see if it lives up to what I remember of it. So, if there is nothing else, John, it was great having you on with us. Hope you'd be willing to come back. It was a great conversation we had with you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate that.
Well, with that being said, I think it's time to sign off. I've been John.
I'm Jack.
You can say it yourself, John.
Hey, I'm John too. So I mean, we're kind of like
We're both
John
John.
squared here.
Yeah.
You're John with an H.
I am John with an H. Yes.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us, and we'll see you next week.